So in the early morning hours of July 13th, 2015, Pilot Getaway's co-founder and editor-in-chief John T. Kounis collapsed at his home and soon after passed away at the hospital unexpectedly at the age of 51.
The aviation world is much darker this week. One of its bright lights has gone out. John Kounis was the editor-in-chief of Pilot Getaway's magazine. He died suddenly of natural causes near his home in California this week.
One of John's biggest dreams was to cross the Pacific Ocean in a single-engine aircraft. His chance came when a friend living in Malaysia wanted to buy a Cessna 185 in the US and then have it ferried across the Pacific. John found an ideal Skywagon, spent months updating, fine-tuning it, and then equipped it with long-range tanks. The longest leg of the trip would be about 17 hours. In preparation for the trip, John made a long-range trip lasting about 11 hours along the California coast. In late May, he flew his first leg from Monterey, California to Hawaii. From there, he hopscotched across the Pacific tiny islands and soon arrived safely in Malaysia, after which he spent a short time flying around Malaysia with his friend. He then took an airline home, his dream fulfilled. 2 weeks after returning home, John developed a sharp pain right below his right shoulder blade. He saw his physician and was diagnosed with pneumonia and then placed on oral antibiotics and sent home. 2 nights later, he collapsed at home and was resuscitated by his brother George. He was then taken to the emergency room where he collapsed again and then later died. Although his death was not the direct result of an aircraft incident, it was directly a result of the long flights he had recently taken. In all the news reports, there was not a single mention of how and why John Kounis had died. It was glossed over, saying only that he had died of natural causes. This is something I don't understand, why this was never brought to light, discussed in any of the aviation forums, because it is such an important topic and something that was totally preventable. Pilots need to be aware of the risks of this disease process. This is what I want to share in this video. What killed John? The pathophysiology of the disease, who's at risk, how to treat it, and most importantly, how to prevent it from happening to you. But before we talk about all that, I want to share my own story with the same disease process, which occurred after a similarly long flight. In February of 2023, my wife and I decided to take a vacation to Bora Bora in the Tahitian Islands. We flew from Medford on a commercial flight to San Francisco, had a 9-hour layover. We were fortunate enough to score some business class seats and therefore spent the whole 9 hours in the brand new Polaris Lounge. It has 2 floors with shower rooms and sleeping rooms downstairs, 3 bars, self-served food all day long, and a sit-down restaurant with a menu. We then boarded a United 787 Dreamliner and flew direct SFO to Papeete. Spent the night in Papeete and then took a puddle jumper to Bora Bora. The final leg was a boat from the airport to the St. Regis Bora Bora Hotel. We stayed in an iconic over-the-water bungalow for 7 nights. We rode bikes everywhere, exercised daily in the gym, went snorkeling, paddleboarding, got massages, and hung out in the pool drinking. The first day I arrived, however, I did notice something unusual on the top of my right foot and ankle. It appeared to be about a 1-2 inch bruise. However, on closer examination, it was more like a petechiae, which is like broken blood vessels. I was otherwise asymptomatic for the entire week. Nothing seemed to be out of sorts. After the 7 days, we flew from Papeete and then direct home to San Francisco and back to Medford. So a total of around 12 hours flight time on the return trip without any interruptions. We arrived home on a Sunday, and the following day I went back to the operating room for a full day of surgeries. The only difference that I noticed during surgery, standing all day, was some pain behind my right knee. I wrote it off to a pulled muscle from exercising that morning. That evening, however, after work, we spent some time in the hot tub and later 25 minutes in the sauna. And it was then that I noticed a sudden swelling and redness of my right leg, the entire leg. No pain, just swelling and redness. At this point, I knew exactly what the problem was. I called my friend in the emergency room, and he saw me immediately, did an ultrasound, and confirmed that I had a blood clot extending from my groin to the ankle on the right leg. He put me on oral blood thinners, Xarelto, sent me home, and told me I could actually go back to work the next day and stand all day and also resume my workouts. But I did take a few days off from my workouts. I didn't, however, miss any work in the operating room. The treatment regimen that I was prescribed was very foreign to me. As a resident in general surgery, anyone who was diagnosed with a blood clot was immediately admitted to the hospital, put on bed rest, leg elevation for a week, and IV heparin. They were then sent home on Coumadin once their clotting times were high enough. My first experience with a blood clot and a pulmonary embolism was as a second-year medical student. A close friend and classmate's father had just undergone a hernia repair in the hospital. In those days, and this would be around 1982, everyone who was having any kind of surgery got admitted to the hospital the night before, had blood tests, and then usually stayed for a day or two after surgery at bed rest. This was, of course, a perfect setup for blood clot formation. On the day of discharge, he got up, went to the bathroom, and collapsed and died. So what causes blood clots in otherwise healthy individuals, and how do they kill? And more importantly, how can you prevent the same thing from happening to you as a pilot? Blood is supposed to clot, otherwise we would bleed to death from just a minor cut. It is balanced by a system that cleans out unwanted clots. If that balance is disrupted, we can either bleed to death or form deadly blood clots in the veins. The mechanism behind the formation of deep venous thrombosis or blood clots involves a combination of primarily decreased blood flow, increased tendency to clot, and any changes to the blood vessel wall with inflammation. Any one of the above alone can cause a blood clot, but the more factors, the higher the risk. Who is at risk then? The number one risk factor is a family history. The strongest risk factor, and first-degree relatives who's had a blood clot puts you in this category, accounting to 50 to 60% of all the blood clots. 2, any personal history of blood clot. If you've ever had a blood clot before, then you're at risk of having another one is as high as 30%. 3, immobility, sitting for prolonged periods of time on the operating room table for a prolonged period of time. 4, any recent surgery. 5, advanced age. There is a direct correlation. The older you are, the higher the risk of a blood clot. Obesity, and again, the heavier you are, the higher the risk. And 7th, any trauma and injuries can cause and increase your risk of blood clots. These are the most common risk factors, but not all of them. But what is it about flying that makes it particularly risky for forming blood clots? Number 1, compression of the popliteal vein, which is the vein behind the knee, on the edge of the seat is felt to be a major contributing factor to venous stasis. And the smaller the seats and the more cramped the space, the higher the risk. 2nd, hemoconcentration or thickening of the blood from dehydration. This is particularly higher risk because of flying, because of the decreased fluid intake, the dry atmosphere in the plane, and the diuretic effects of alcohol. 3, decreased air pressure and relative hypoxia in the cabin reduces fibrinolytic activity and may lead to the release of vein wall relaxant factors that enhance blood pooling in the veins. 4th, the inability to get up and move around frequently. One study showed an increase in blood clots in those passengers seated in the window seats. The net result is an increased annual risk of venous thromboembolism by 12% in travelers after just one long-haul flight every year. There's no question that the longer the flight, the higher the risk of forming a blood clot. So what are the signs and symptoms of deep venous thrombosis? Unfortunately, in about a quarter of people, the first symptom is death. Pulmonary embolism is the 3rd leading cause of cardiovascular death of all cardiovascular diseases. It's not infrequent to have patients who have had symptoms for days or even weeks before going to the hospital to find out what is wrong, just not knowing what these symptoms means. Therefore, being aware of symptoms is critical, especially after long flights. According to the American Heart Association, pulmonary embolism was a factor in more than 36,000 deaths in 2018. The rate has been climbing for reasons that are not clear since then. A blood clot in a leg would include symptoms such as pain, swelling, redness, warmth, especially if one leg is suddenly more swollen than the other, as in my case. If a clot breaks free from the leg and travels to the lungs, it can cause chest pain or shortness of breath, as in John's case. Less commonly, people have a sensation of heart racing, and they might even cough up a little bit of pink or blood-tinged sputum every once in a while. People can have pain in the upper part of their back also. The most important advice then is, how do you prevent blood venous thrombosis from occurring? First of all, if you are at high risk, I would highly recommend talking to your personal physician about options. For myself, I take the following precautions. 1, I hydrate well. This does not mean alcohol, which you should probably avoid on any long flight. Second, I do wear compression hose. A recent study has shown that this does work and will decrease the incidence of blood clots. Third, get up and move around at least every hour or half hour while in the plane. Fourth, I request an aisle seat. Fifth, if you can't get up, do foot and calf and thigh exercises as well. Move around in your seat. Sixth, any flight over 4 hours, I take an anticoagulant such as Xarelto and will redose every 12 hours. I have many physician friends who have never had a blood clot but are of advanced age and prophylactically take a Xarelto prior to every long-haul flight. If you don't have access to an anticoagulant, then I would take an aspirin starting the night before the flight. Seventh, they now make pneumatic compression hose for travel, which squeeze the legs while you sit in the airplane. These are portable and you can use them on commercial flights now. Dying from a blood clot after a prolonged flight is an underestimated and underappreciated cause of death, which is totally preventable. I believe it is essential that pilots and passengers are familiar with the risks, know how to prevent it, and take actions to do so. I believe pilot associations and groups have a responsibility to educate every single pilot about those risks. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me either through the website or the comments below. And if you'd like to see more videos on similar topics, please subscribe. Thank you.